From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thanks for joining me today. Today is part 2 of an interview I had with my favorite guitar player, Mark Lee Townsend. If you missed it, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and check it out, or anywhere podcasts are being played, The Rick Altizer Show, you can find it. And Mark, just to remind those who maybe you didn't hear last week, Mark is a guitar player. He was in the band DC Talk, toured with them in their heyday, and also as a producer, produced the band Reliant K, and now as a band leader for the Jay Sekulow Band. Mark, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you so much, Rick. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome back for another interview. Didn't scare you off.
No, not at all.
You know, that was a week ago, but it's interesting how you look just like you did last week. I mean, you're still wearing the same clothes and everything.
You know, I'm an ageless wonder. What can I tell you?
We pre-record these, so we just finished show 1 about 5 minutes ago, so we're going to do show 2 now. So
I love it.
So fantastic. Last week we did talk about your kind of like your foray into guitar playing, as a, getting in from bashing the code,
yes, to
DC Talk, traveling all over America and big arenas all over the world, I guess.
Yes,
with
absolutely.
DC Talk. And then you started talking about transitioning from that into producing as a producer.
That's right.
Being a producer, you get to stay home, be with your family, not being on the road so much. Talk a little bit about that again, about kind of how you transitioned into a production role.
Yeah, I have always, probably like you, I've always tinkered around in recording music and things throughout the years from a very young age. I remember, the touring thing was wonderful. I mean, and working with DC Talk especially, that's kind of the last major touring situation I did before the door opened to produce. But on the in-betweens of DC Talk shows, we'd do a tour and then typically there'd be a little bit of time off. I was always recording bands or solo artists or things of that nature in my home studio. And as I mentioned before on the last broadcast, my daughters, who were in high school at the time, said, hey, we have friends of ours that are this little band, little youth group band kind of thing. They're a punk band, and it's like, Dad, can you do a demo for them? Sure, it's my daughters. What am I going to tell them? And so we literally set everybody up live, played down through like 14 tunes in a day, okay? And I'm just listening, and as this stuff's going down, I'm going, some of this stuff's pretty clever lyrically. Some of it, I mean, for a bunch of young guys, it's pretty clever, And so we literally cut all the music one day. Next afternoon, brought them in to do the vocals. They did it, knocked it down. I think I mixed it in a day.
Were these all originals?
Yes, all of them.
14 originals.
14 originals.
High school kids.
High school kids.
Writing their own stuff.
Absolutely. Matt Teese, and even back then, he was big time influenced by a couple of MXPX, some of the Christian punk band things, right. Some of the General Market stuff, but also a funny band. I think they were out of D.C. area called Goaty Hook that were just very humorous, Christian punk bands at the time. So I'm listening to all this stuff, and I put together this little demo for them, and it's not bad. It's not great. I mean, they're not all that good of players back then. And Toby, when I was out on the road the next time, Townsend, what do you got? I know you're always recording stuff. So I played him 3 or 4 bands that I had been working with. And one band was like a Dave Matthews type band out of Indiana, out of Anderson, out of Anderson University College, whatever it was. And they were really good. And I thought Toby would jump all over that. And he hears this little punk band, and he goes, oh, I really like that. Toby spotted that. I mean, even back then. And he goes, man, we need to develop this. Okay. All right. So we did. And at that point, it just blossomed from there. He always kind of left us to our own devices. And I give Toby a lot of credit.
And he had his own record label.
That's right, called Goatee, which is still
Records.
around. That's right.
Was Toby's label that he started with, who did he start that with?
His cousin, Joey Elwood.
Joey, yeah.
That's right, who is still the label president to this day. And they have been extremely artist-friendly. But, I mean, they've had all kinds of acts. I mean, Reliant K is probably the biggest thing that they found on Goatee, but they had Out of Eden and just through the years, of course, Jennifer Knapp, people of this nature. They've had a lot of different acts on the label. Even now, still putting out singles. But yeah, so that's when the production thing opened up. We started selling records all of a sudden. By the time the second album went gold, and it's like, okay, I think I can get off the road now.
So you were the producer of that.
I was producer engineer. Yeah, absolutely.
You engineered it as well.
Absolutely, yes.
So was this all done in your studio?
Yes, all the early records, clear up until the fourth one, which is called were done at my home studio up in Ohio.
So
yes.
The band Reliant K. And did you play on any of it at all?
I played very little on purpose, because I knew in the industry that people would basically figure that I was playing all the guitars on the records, and I beat those poor kids to death to get them to play in time, and they did. So they played, but typically they would have me play something if it was a little past their ability, or if it was a very precise acoustic track, things that are more difficult to do in the studio for young guys.
Okay.
So
you would play here and there, but
that's right.
But you weren't. It wasn't you all over the place.
No, I said I was a bit of a taskmaster, and we just rehearsed till we got it right.
Yeah, that was like, I know Adrian Ballou produced my stuff, and he produced Jars of Clay.
That's right.
Flood and Liquid, but that was him playing everything on that.
Right. I didn't take that route, and there have been other projects I've worked on that I have gone that route, but specifically with that. I think it worked out well for them because
for the punk
developed.
thing too, you don't want it to be too tight.
That's correct.
You want it to be a little loose.
That's right. You want authenticity. That's correct.
Yeah, you want that. There's just something about, you listen to the Replacements, you listen to some of that stuff, and it's sloppy and messy. That's right. That's what makes it work.
And they rose to the occasion. I said, I think they really rose to the occasion, and that was good.
So now you're all of a sudden producing a band who's like selling a lot of records.
Yes.
So as a producer, you get points on that.
That's correct.
You get a percentage of what they make. So like a band member would make money for every record sold, a producer would as well.
That's correct.
Did you have any songwriting at all, or was this all them?
No, basically, I kind of subscribed to the Todd Rundgren approach, though, because even though he had worked on arrangements and writing with different people, he just felt it was part of the production. And there's some producers that feel that way.
Credit for it, yeah.
That's right. There are some people that feel that way and other producers that don't, And in my case, I more steered the ship through the waters and would edit and things of that nature. But no, really, Matt Thiessen, the main writer in the band, he developed and blossomed into just a fantastic songwriter.
Yeah, absolutely. You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show. My guest today, guitar player, producer, Mark Lee Townsend, one of my favorite guitar players on the planet. When you say that, you always have to put the caveat of Phil Kagi in there.
Phil is awesome. He's a dear friend, has been for a long time. Phil is just the best human being on the planet. It's funny.
He's so sweet.
About a year or so ago, me and my wife were having a house built, and so we were living in a temporary situation, which is always never fun. No, even if you're living with wonderful people that you know, it's not your home, And it was just a stressful situation for me. And I just I hit up Phil and I said, "Hey man, could you put together like a playlist for me of just your favorite stuff that you've done?" Like it was really. He sent me a Dropbox folder full of his stuff that was so good, and just working my way through it, just mind-boggling. I'm going, gosh. What a God-given talent. And
that guy,
and the nicest human being on the planet.
He's
Him
so
and
sweet.
John Schlitt are people that you put in like the nicest human being Hall of Fame. They just are. They're
John
terminally
Schlitt,
nice.
lead singer from Petra. So
yep.
So okay. So now you're a producer, but you're a successful producer.
By the grace of God. Thank you, Lord.
Does the phone start to ring?
Definitely. Phone definitely rang, and for me, I kind of went sideways compared to what most independent producers would do. I was asked to come down to Nashville and run a label that was owned by Blanton and Hero, which were Amy Grant's management at the time and Michael W. Smith's management. And it was a label that was going to be distributed by Warner Brothers, and the goal was to sign Christian artists that were definitely Christian, but make records for the general marketplace.
Okay.
And so I came down here specifically to do that and move my family down. And we did for several years, and it was marginally successful. all things out of my own control.
What label is this?
It was actually called Brave New World Records.
Okay.
And the label group, I think, was called BHT or something of that nature. But there were 3 different labels that came out of it. One was more of a AC, church-oriented label. I ran the rock label. And I had a couple of really good bands. A band out of Arkansas called The Wedding, especially. Tremendously talented band. The really good, a bunch of good Southern guys that just love Jesus.
Now, talk about the difference between being a producer and a label president, label head. I mean, those are 2 different, completely different
animals. Yes, and for me, I was always much more comfortable being just a producer in that sense, because when you throw the music business side of things, and it's like anything else, like selling shoes or anything else. You deal with margins, you deal with marketing, you deal with budgets, and it's like, man, that is so not my world. There are people that are so good at that. I just want to take care of the music, by and large. And but I realize that it's a part of the business, and you have to be conscious of it. So,
as a producer, did you get pigeonholed as the guitar band punk?
To a certain degree.
Kind of punk band guy. Oh, that's the punk band guy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of producers have that. I mean, I think there's a lot of producers here in town that do worship records, and you can't do anything other than a worship record.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The industry is very, especially the Christian industry, I feel is very stereotypical. Like, yeah, that's the pop punk guy. Yeah. And I think I did get labeled as that pretty much. It's okay. It's how things are. And
yeah. So then as pop punk isn't in favor as much,
that's right.
Worship music comes in. I call it all U2 light.
Yes.
It's just we're going to sound like U2, kind of a light version of U2. And it's just U2 light came in and just kind of took over.
Yeah. To me, like the first worship song, the first CCM Christian worship song was With or Without You.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it's the running joke, unfortunately.
No, it's interesting because I'm reading his book, Surrender, Bono's book, which is a really interesting book. But it's interesting the impact they had on Christian music.
No question about it.
They have driven it, really. Yeah. And you can still go to most churches, with the smoke, and they're trying to be real hip and all that. I have a policy. I will not lead worship with smoke. I will not be on stage. You will have to get another worship leader. That will not be me.
Yeah, that's my camp too.
I'm not going to do the smoke. Just not doing that. But
especially, for me, some of the best worship that I ever was involved with. On the first broadcast, we talked about Bashing the Code, the band I was in out of Philly.
Right.
We were going to Calvary Chapel, Philly, and back then they were meeting in a strip on the mall. Okay, their worship leader was a guy with a Yamaha DX7 keyboard and one guy playing acoustic, and the acoustic leader barely was an okay singer. The worship was unbelievably great.
Yeah.
Because they knew the songs. There were no distractions. Mm-hmm. It was just pure heart.
Yeah. I love that.
And that's what ministers to me typically.
So, as a producer, if you're not known as the U2 guy.
That's right.
Right. So then let's talk then about, so you've had this great success at Reliant K, and as a producer, you come down to Nashville to run a label.
Yes.
Like so many labels start up, and it's like restaurants. It's a really hard business to stay in business.
It absolutely is.
Talk a little bit about then after the label, kind of what happened.
Well, after the label, I went back to being an independent producer and continued to do more Reliant K records. And that was actually the understanding I had with the label. It's like, yes, I will work for you, but also when a big independent job comes up, I'm allowed to take it. And they were very gracious to allow me to do that. So we produced during that time period some of Reliant K's biggest albums. Which was good. And then that led to other different things and working with different artists throughout that. But and I've been independent since, but like everyone else in the industry, with the industry changing and CDs no longer being sold,
right?
You've had to adapt. So I wear 5 different hats. So I also music direct and work in different bands and create content for the internet. And music bumpers and beds and things. That's part of what I do with the Jay Sekulow Band.
Right.
And then on my own musically, I I put together a solo album a few years ago that is very special to me, and it is definitely a gospel story.
Let's talk about that. Tell me about this solo album you did a couple of years ago.
I'd love to. My dad passed away in 2005, and I was right in the middle of working on a record down here in Nashville. He was up in Columbus, Ohio. I had no idea. He was in great shape at 85 years old, and he passed within a few days. And I talked to him actually the day before, and was under the impression he was going to come home, and he basically fell asleep in the hospital bed and had left instructions not to be revived. But before that, my dad never talked about his upbringing, and his upbringing was very difficult. He grew up in the Depression. He was the product. His parents were not married when he was conceived, which in 1919 would have been a very radical thing. My grandfather Townsend was, let's say, a difficult person, and the decisions that he made in his life were difficult. Infidelity, alcoholism, a lot of the things back then. He was a factory worker, but then when the factory would close up during the Depression, he'd go out to the suburbs or the farm areas and work on farms. And my dad had to deal with all of that. He was very difficult on my dad. And the story of my album, it's called 1919, The Ballad of Rexford. Rexford was my dad's name. And the whole album is kind of a concept record, which those of us that grew up in the 70s and 80s knew what a concept record is in that sense, where the songs all kind of tie together and lead in. But the story is essentially Jesus Saves. My dad did not pass those same difficulties onto me because of his relationship with Jesus.
Oh, praise the Lord.
And even after my dad was saved and my dad and mom were married, and I have two older sisters, my mom was very sick. So my dad, his hardships in life did not stop once he became a believer and was married and raising a family. He worked for a company for 30 years. Company went bankrupt, left him with nothing, no pension, anything. Worked for another company for 5, same thing. No pension, bankrupt in the industry. And then, so he dealt with a lot of hardship. My mom's health issues took her life at 58 years old, which, I've outlived my mother, which is insane to me. But that God absolutely was gracious with her the whole way. But the album is ultimately a story of how through all the difficulties in life, Jesus is Jesus. He's Lord. He has the answer. And ultimately, the payoff is being home with him, which is what both my parents are there with him. So I do solo shows a lot of times in churches where I do certain songs of it. I tell the story and ultimately share the gospel. My dad was saved during his high school years in a church, in a tiny little church in Columbus, Ohio on the South End that is still there, ironically, but it's special. My dad heard the gospel and he came forward and he made a profession of faith that stuck with him all the way to going home.
Wow. What a blessing to have that. What a legacy. You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today is a guitar player, producer, and band leader, Mark Lee Townsend. And we're talking about the album that he made, special album that he made for his dad, kind of based on his dad, 1919.
The Ballad of Rexford, yes.
Ballad of Rexford.
And it's under my name, Mark Lee Townsend, and it's anywhere you listen to digital music. And
making an album, for your dad, about your dad's story. I mean, that's personal.
Absolutely.
How is that different from another record that you might make, say, for Reliant K, or just another album that you might make on your own? How does this differ in the way you make this album?
That is a fantastic question. As a producer, the whole album came out of an interview with my dad. Me and my dad actually did not get along all that great growing up. Okay, me being a musician, him being raised in the Depression. They didn't this is a nice hobby that Mark has. They didn't have a concept that, I might actually be able to make a living in music. I understand that completely. It was a different era. My dad was 43 when I was born. Okay, so that it's just a different era. The whole album came out of an interview I did with my dad. I stuck a micro cassette recorder about 3 years before he passed, and we were sitting one afternoon on a kitchen table. I came up from Nashville and was sitting there talking to my dad in Columbus, Ohio, and I just started asking him every question I could ever think of him. including he was a World War II veteran. And just talking about his service, talking about his upbringing, the whole thing, I based the entire album off the recording. Okay, as a producer, if I'm working with Reliant K, I'm thinking about, okay, I want to get the writer's message across. I want to get the band's music across, but I also want to take into account commercial appeal. You know, I want something that is going to hit the masses. I want something that, as a project, glues together. Okay, with my solo album, I threw that whole thing out the window. I did every wrong thing that you could possibly do. I made an album that was deeply personal to myself. It's all over the place musically. It's not glued together. I have a lot of guests on it, including Matt Thiessen. I have some guest singers here and there singing
Reliant
parts.
K, singer from Reliant K.
That's right. Davey Basinger, the singer from Bleach, is on it. There's just some different guess on it, but I literally wrote the whole album as a timeline. I did everything possibly. It's an hour, almost an hour's worth of music on a single record,
right?
And I said stuff I would never do with somebody else.
So then, how do you feel about that album now? You look back on the work you've done. Where do you put that album in your canon of the things you've done, and how it, for you personally?
It still remains deeply personal to me. It remains uplifting to me, and the people that have actually heard the record, I think it ministers to them as well. It's interesting because Jesus is mentioned nowhere on the record. That wasn't intentional at all. It's very obvious to anybody that listens to the record about the journey. It almost comes off a little bit like a Ken Burns film in some ways. When I do the show live, I have loads of family pictures on video behind me, and I tell the story, the dysfunction of my dad's upbringing. I had no idea how absolutely rotten. My grandfather was cheating on my grandmother the whole time. He used to beat on my dad, beat on my grandmother.
Terrible.
And it was just difficult, overall. And
how do you put that in a song? How do you?
I have a song on it, especially called "The Hardest Job," and I was very gracious to my grandfather. The whole front half of the album is from my grandfather's perspective. The back half is from my dad's perspective. Okay, on the writing. So anybody that listens to that, they will understand that.
Interesting. So what an interesting, just exercise in, the importance of dealing. This happened after your father had passed.
This happened after my dad passed.
It was a way for you to process the loss of your dad.
Totally.
Some of that relationship thing that you grieved. It's a way to process that. And so it's important, for those who have a father who might be elderly, I love that idea. Show up with a little tape and just your phone. Press record on your phone, and do a little interview. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your dad. Tell me about how you met mom. Tell me about some of your struggles. What an amazing exercise to do, and what an amazing thing to do. And it's got like acoustic guitars. It's got
it's got all kinds of stuff. I did the string arrangements myself and things of that nature. It's partly a rock album, but it's partly piano driven. It's partly acoustic driven. But like the songs, for example, I had no idea, but my parents met at a YMCA dance. Okay, a big band dance, and then a post war in the 1940s. And so I have a song called "The Dance Hall" that represents that type of thing. This song I was telling you about, "The Hardest Job." My grandfather worked in a factory. The tagline is, "Why can't I stop myself from bringing the anger home? You know I'd never want to hurt you."
Yeah,
right. And his struggle with that.
What an amazing way to, just the catharsis of that, of working through that stuff through song, through the gifting God gave you.
Yeah.
People can hear that by going to markleetownsend.com.
That's right.
You can find that album. And then from there, you're the band leader of the Jay Sekulow Band.
That's right.
You've got John Elefante, who's a singer from Kansas.
That's right. John Schlitt from Petra, John Lowry from Petra. We do a combination of cover songs and originals that are written around some of the narratives of Jay's cases. The originals are used as bumper music for his radio show, which is great. Jay is a wonderful friend and tremendously good at what he does.
Fantastic. And, I mentioned this last week. You can go on YouTube and you can just search for the Jay Sekulow Band. and there's cover versions of everything in concerts, but the band is really tight. Sounds great.
We have a blast. Jay's narratives are fun. He'll open up and talk about some things in between songs, cases where he can.
But I just got to say, for me, the highlight's the guitar playing.
Well,
the highlights, your solos are so good. They're so spot on.
So much
and
fun.
You're such a talented guitar player.
I appreciate it.
You have been just such a joy to have on the show. Thank you so much
for inviting
being here.
Me. I appreciate it.
This has been so good. We ran into each other at the Petra concert. I said, I got to put you on the show. You're going to be great.
It's great reconnecting.
I knew you'd be great. And again, you can get more information by going to markleetownsend.com.
That's right.
Check out what he's doing, what he's working on. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show
Rick.
tonight.
Appreciate it.
What a great time for part 2. We did it, man. This is awesome.
We did it without a net even,
I love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.